Whenever you are ready.
I'm ready. Ready,
All right.
Freddy.
Let's do this.
Ready with the spaghetti.
So what's happening?
Working.
I got a workout already in today.
I saw that you popped in here pretty early today.
Yeah, I came in here and did a little bit of cardio session and hit up some deadlifts and some bent over rows and some leg curls, just moving around, trying to feel good.
Gonna work out again?
I might work out again because my workouts are a little shorter. So actually they're a lot shorter. Like they might only be like 20, 30 minutes long. So when they're shorter, it's kind of easier just to get them in because you're not thinking about your workout being so hard. And I think that's a huge problem that a lot of people make when they're thinking about a diet, they're thinking about exercise, is they're thinking about, man, this is going to be, I have to go keto or I have to do carnivore, or I have to be vegan, or they think that they have to do something so crazy. And it's like, well, where are you starting from?
Yeah.
Let's figure that out. If you're starting from the couch, then a simple walk outside would be fantastic progress. And to do that for a few days in a row, that would be a really excellent place to start.
Yeah.
It doesn't always have to be so hard, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, just change the simple things first. I know a lot of people that when they first start lifting, they start with like their programs have like 2.5 workouts or 2.5 hour long workouts. I'm just like, God dang. Like, no, you're not going to stick to that. They work out like 6 or 7 days a week. Just start slow.
Well, we know a lot of people too that exercise frequently and that don't have nearly the body that they want or the strength that they want. And these same people will, on a Friday, Saturday night, they might go and let loose. And then they're like, all right, that's it. Back on Monday. Like when Monday comes around, cardio in the morning, fasted, and then I'm going to hit the gym at night. And it's like, dude, you're really you're setting up a really rough schedule for yourself. That's okay that you enjoyed yourself. That's fine. Everyone should. Everyone's got the right to. Good for you. And just, just like Jake Cutler said, don't be fancy, be consistent. Figure out a way to be consistent with it. If you're able to do fasting, that's great. If you're able to throw in some cardio, that's cool. If you're able to mix in some lifting, some cardio, and some fasting, that's great. But it doesn't have to start out that way. You don't have to start out with a big bang right away. You can kind of chip away at things. You can work your way into things. That's kind of why I'm excited to talk to today's guest, because it's like, how do you end up down this rabbit hole like this? We got another carnivore guy on the podcast today, and not only is he carnivore, but he's like eating raw meat, right?
He's a deep savage. Yeah, he's eating raw meat, raw liver.
Dude, you ever done that before?
No.
What about sushi?
Oh yeah, I've done sushi.
Yeah.
I guess it's odd that's
carpaccio.
Accepted, right?
You ever have carpaccio, like sliced beef? Just pretty much. I think the same thing's raw.
I think when I went to a restaurant
Thinly
with you
sliced.
guys, yeah, they had carpaccio. That was the first time I had that. But like in my household, we cook our our meat, bro. Like we all cook our meat. So, yeah, this is it's definitely different. It's a culture shock.
Yeah, the only thing I've ever had is just poke.
Yeah, I've had poke too. But no, now that I think about it, it is kind of odd that I'm cool with eating like fish, right, raw fish. But the idea of eating absolute raw meat, like raw, is kind of odd, right? Yeah, I just kind of put those two together. Now. I'm like, I never thought of that.
It's weird too, because like a raw steak doesn't sound that bad, but raw ground beef sounds horrifying.
Yeah. Sounds disgusting.
Completely horrifying.
Yeah.
Or raw chicken. Can you even eat raw chicken?
I don't think he eats raw chicken. I think he does like straight raw red meat.
I mean, can you just grab a bird and try to just eat it, or
pluck the feathers and go
bite a cow?
just straight up eat it.
Freaking tackle him and
like a true carnivore.
Have you had like raw liver and stuff like that? Like just straight up? Have you done that?
I don't think I have.
Yeah. There's a video of him, like he has this like large raw liver. You're just chewing and he eats the whole thing. I'm just like, God, how does that taste?
I would like to eat something's heart just to say that I did.
That would be
pretty savage, yeah.
Because that's like a Mike Tyson saying. I want to eat his heart. I want to eat his children.
I remember when he said that. Yeah,
he did eat somebody's ear.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, that's it's interesting. Well, I guess we'll get to the bottom of it. We'll try to figure out why the hell this guy's doing all this stuff.
Yeah, it looks like he's good to go. So you guys want to hit him up?
Yeah, let's do it.
Right.
It'd be easier just to be born Nigerian.
It would
That's definitely true.
Then you just have perfect skin. You're handsome and tall and strong and all that stuff, right? You get to laugh at everybody else. Hey, there he is. How's it going, Frank?
What's going on?
Hello.
How are you, gentlemen?
Look at this guy's got perfect teeth and perfect skin. Is this from eating raw meat? What do we got going on here?
His teeth are so white.
Little bit of column A, little bit of column B. I'll leave it at that.
There you go.
What's going on with this diet? It looks pretty crazy to see you eating like raw liver and stuff. How did you even get into something like this? I'd imagine you weren't doing this when you were 5 years old, right?
No, it's actually a pretty interesting story. I used to be really big into bodybuilding, fitness, that whole thing. And I did it from when I was about 13 to maybe 20. And at some point I said, this isn't for me. I never really wanted to take it to a professional level. Never had a large bone structure. I was always like 5'8", like 150, 160 pounds, even when I was muscular. Figured it just wasn't for me. And after taking a drug called Accutane, which I didn't actually know at the time, that kind of ruined my digestive system. I was eating 3, 4, 5 pounds of sweet potatoes a day and had no energy. So I was like, okay, this isn't working for me. How can I figure out what I should be doing? I literally started Googling what the healthiest diet is, came across a few different YouTube channels, and ended up discovering a book on indigenous civilizations. It was called Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. And this dentist went around early 1900s, and he noticed one thing that was consistent across every single diet of these native people. That was the presence of certain animal foods, and particularly ones that were along the lines of organ meats. And even though we're talking about organ meats and things that people don't deem as approachable, other nutrient-dense foods that are more approachable, like some of these groups of people had shellfish, crab, mollusks, clams. They had dairy products. They had eggs. It's not just, biting a piece of raw liver out of a live animal. And I said, okay, this makes sense. And upon further inspecting these animal products, they had an inherent fat-soluble vitamin content. And I can get into the actual bioavailability of that stuff in a bit. But the other thing I was thinking was, okay, I don't have energy eating carbohydrates. And if animal foods are the most nutritious foods, according to what I've read here, then wouldn't it make sense to eat animal fat as my source of energy? And putting it together in my head made sense because, okay, well, animal foods have the highest amount of nutrients in their most available forms. And animal fat can be used as an energy source in ketosis. And then I read another book called Primal Body, Primal Mind. And at the time, which was about over 6 years ago now, I kind of paralleled a keto diet with a paleo diet and said, okay, I'm going to do paleo keto, but that pretty much means that I'm only eating meat and fat. So my theory behind not including vegetables and fruits were that the modern forms of the fruits and vegetables, in a lot of cases, and especially at certain times of the year, weren't necessarily as high in nutrition as they used to be. And at the time, I didn't actually know about the carnivore diet. And there was actually a forum, Zero Carb at the time. That's what the diet was referred to. And I came across it. And upon reading what that diet was, just muscle meat and no real guidelines to nutrients, no real guidelines to macronutrient ratios, I didn't really think much of it. So, 3-4 years go by and I decided to make a YouTube channel because one of my goals was to convey the importance of these nutrients to other people and how good I felt. And even though I took that drug Accutane twice, I mean, it ruined my liver, ruined my body. I'm sure there are so many people familiar with the drug and how bad it is. Even though I took that drug twice, it still didn't fix my acne. The only thing that actually ended up fixing my acne was going on this diet and removing a lot of foods and increasing the nutrients. But there's a lot of the three main things I use to explain aspects of my diet are: one, a logical standpoint; two, the anthropological evidence of our ancestors; and three, the scientific point of view, actually looking at the nutrient content of foods and the mechanisms in the body. And we can observe that through nutrient databases or even mechanistic studies.
You were eating large amounts of potatoes back in the day. It sounded like you said you were eating like 3 or 4 pounds of potatoes every single day. Nowadays, do you eat any carbohydrates?
No. So over my 6.5 years now on this diet, the only time I ever consumed carbohydrates was back in last year, April of 2018. I started experimenting completely raw. Most of the time I consume maybe 60, 70% of my food is not cooked, I'm sorry, 60-70% raw, and then the rest is cooked. And when I mean cooked, even though I'm just cooking the steaks blue rare a lot of the time, but that one time I did try carbohydrates was on the raw primal diet. I had a little bit of raw honey, and I tried incorporating some dairy products again. And that, I mean, I've always had a dairy allergy when I was younger, so that didn't really work out so well. As much as milk products from a local farm, raw, high quality, grass fed, although there's definitely some things you have to be aware of if doing that. The difference between like those dairy products directly from the farm and the dairy products that you buy on the shelf in the supermarket, that's definitely a discussion to be had. So my reasoning for incorporating anything into your diet is either nutrient density or energy. And the role that carbohydrates or grains play in my mind is when we look at certain indigenous groups in the recent few thousand years when agriculture started and we started producing readily available forms of carbohydrates, they replaced wild plant foods as an energy source. And every single one of these carbohydrate sources can be addressed on an individual basis in regards to its composition, its preparation methods, what the pros and cons are. Obviously, something like modern wheat, which is made from hard red winter wheat, it has 48 chromosomes, it's hybridized, it's much more inflammatory than an heirloom variety of wheat, like einkorn wheat, has 12 chromosomes. It's something our ancestors would have consumed. So not only do you have to look at the base food, you have to look also at the preparation of it. Are you naturally fermenting that sourdough bread and breaking down the anti-nutrient content, or are you just throwing that bread in the oven as is with a yeast starter overnight? And then there's, of course, a bunch of different grains have different preparations, from oats to rice, bunch of grains across all indigenous groups. But one thing I did want to touch on as a final in this regard is the sheer variety of foods these people consumed. And the variety of preparation is absolutely absurd. Imagine this. You go fishing in a river, and there's 10 different types of fish in that river. And for each of those 10 different types of fish, there's 10 different species. So you might have 6, 7 different types of trout in one river. So just the amount of animal foods that our ancestors consumed was incredible. Hundreds to thousands, let alone wild plant foods. Imagine walking into essentially a jungle and seeing just the sheer variety of foods we used to eat. That being said, there are indigenous groups that only ate, like some of them, maybe they only had Swiss cheese and rye bread. So it is definitely something important to note. But what's even crazier is one indigenous group might have prepared one food in one way and another group would do it in a different way. And the amount of different ways they would do it, imagine you could take a fish, you can eat it raw, you can cold smoke it, you can hot smoke it, you can boil it, like in an oven, you could bake it in fire, you could roast it over an open fire. There's dozens of different food preparations that these people practice because it was their job. Their job was survival in nature, and their job was to prepare food. And you can imagine if you have limited food access in your environment, you're probably going to start doing some interesting things to either change the composition or to preserve it. And each of these things serve different purposes.
One of the few people I've ever heard talk about, switching up the type of meat that you eat was Charles Poliquin. I don't know if you're aware of some of his work, but he mentioned that he thought it was important that you don't just always eat cow. You don't always eat elk. You switch things up a bunch. And do you think that's important too, to have a wide variety? You're not just eating cow meat all the time?
I think a good answer to that question is yes, there was a sheer variety of meats in the indigenous groups, but the one consistent thing was the quality. So when you have access to different sources of meat, it helps to vary them because as you don't necessarily know the quality of the animal unless you raised it yourself. So if you buy grass-fed meat from one place and grass-fed meat from another place, I have like pictures on my Instagram of this grass-fed beef fat. It looks orange, but I'm sure you've never seen something like that in a supermarket. So the quality of the food definitely ties in here. And when you're only eating one type of meat from one source, that's where you start to question, okay, is this the highest quality source of meat I'm eating? The only scenario where I would say it's okay to eat one source of food is if you're literally seeing what that animal is eating in its life, essentially. Of course, there's a realism that we have to have that's practical to life, that we can't always be eating the highest quality foods at all periods of time. But that doesn't necessarily justify going to like a restaurant and having wings fried in soybean oil every night.
So like when I'm hearing what you're saying about like the foods you eat, it seems that whenever you're looking at these meats and you're looking at your food as far as a utility, um,
Yeah,
and you're looking at it from
100%.
a big micronutrient standpoint. So what's going to give me the most
Hmm.
nutrients in what
Yeah.
I eat? So I'm curious because whenever I see people go from like, pure carnivore or pure vegan, right? And they
Hmm.
just cut out all certain forms of food. And a lot of individuals that do carnivore, a lot of people feel much better than when they were eating all of these carbohydrates. But then I see a lot
Hmm.
of vegans that claim that they're feeling much better eating no meat.
Hmm.
How would you, like, let's just say, bring somebody to the other side, or would you even think that they should
Hmm.
if they're feeling much better doing something
Hmm.
totally opposite to the carnivore deal?
Okay. So the carnivore diet achieves one thing inherently. That's the removal of inflammatory foods.
Okay.
The vegan diet can do the same thing. So the reason I market myself to the carnivore diet is because my diet is technically a carnivore diet,
Mhm.
but what my diet achieves is the micronutrient density. And before really going into a discussion of the vegan versus the carnivore diet and actually like analyzing, okay, vitamin A in its plant and animal form, vitamin K2 in its plant and animal form, what we can look at is what happens to vegans after they go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months on a vegan diet. So B12 deficiency is obviously something that you can't ignore. Every vegan needs to supplement B12. And for me, the logical perspective behind B12 doesn't make sense because you're literally following a diet that you could not follow when they didn't have the supplements, even 40, 50 years ago. That's one logical thing wrong with it. And I haven't done an incredible amount of research on this yet, but I'm not sure if B12 blood levels are indicative of tissue levels. That's definitely something I would be concerned about. But B12 is definitely associated with neurocognitive problems in the long run. And the second thing is the iron. I haven't seen any proof that vegans would not be anemic in the long run. It's not an issue in some people. And one thing that I should have said before this was people have different genes that regulate how well they assimilate vitamins from plants. That's why some people last a very long time on a vegan diet and some people fall apart in 2 months.
Mm.
One other vitamin that's not really spoken about is vitamin D3. And I think vitamin D3 is the best argument against a vegan diet because the skin itself synthesizes cholesterol to absorb vitamin D3. So if you don't have extra cholesterol in your body, you literally can't achieve certain levels of vitamin D3. So I would make an argument that from an ideal health perspective, it's physically impossible to get your D3 levels to that amount on a vegan diet. So those are just problems with a vegan diet in general. I
Yeah.
mean, this, but another thing to consider is a standard American diet is so poor that when people refer to standard American dieters as meat eaters, the macronutrient ratios in a standard American diet are 30% animal foods and 70% plant foods. So these meat eaters, are they really meat eaters? And what's even more interesting is vegans always talk about blue zones, these zones where people have unusually high life expectancy. But guess what the macronutrient ratio of blue zones are? It is the exact same as standard American diets. When we actually look at what these blue zone people eat, they might eat 70% of their calories from grains and 30%, well, more or less, and 30% from animal foods. But the food quality is the difference. They're not eating McDonald's burger. They're not eating McDonald's burgers and what was my favorite cereal when I was a kid? What's the Cookie Crisp? Like that type of stuff. So they're not eating that type of stuff. These people are drinking sheep milk straight from the goat in their backyard. These people are eating the highest quality cheeses, the highest quality grains. They're preparing them in certain ways. And there's definite pitfalls in the context of a standard American diet that we have to kind of brush to the side. The problem with the vegan diet is we're missing those main nutrients, but there isn't, and I always tell people this, whether it's 5, 10, 20, 30 years from now, these vitamins, there's going to be a big emphasis on them because they are literally the most important things in human function. And I'm sure you guys have heard about the importance of vitamin D3 in the recent past and how doctors are even subscribing vitamin D3 in larger amounts. And there was a study that I post on my Twitter like every week. The vitamin D3 RDA was based on a statistical fallacy. The 400 IU RDA was actually supposed to be 9,000 IU. So there's definitely something to be said about the importance of these vitamins going under the rug. But the reason I'm saying this is because I can't even convince carnivore dieters to eat these nutrient-dense foods. How am I supposed to convince a vegan to do it? It's very, very difficult to turn people off. What I like to do is I like to present information and let people make the decision for themselves. And of course, there's a lot of things that go into that, an unusual amount of things that go into that. But if someone really wants to make a turning point, what I always tell people is if you do something and it doesn't work, you might want to think about doing it in general. That's, when I take vitamin D3, when you go out in the sun to the beach, you feel euphoric, right? You feel amazing after going to the beach. When I eat foods like liver and salmon roe, when I eat certain high vitamin animal foods, I feel like running through some drywall. I can go. I used to work as a bartender. I still do. And sometimes I would go like 2 or 3 nights without sleeping. And then I'd have to go down to Manhattan, work a 10 or 12 hour shift. And I'd still be running circles around everyone else. So there's definitely something to be said about optimizing your energy levels and how you feel on your diet. Is a vegan diet better than a standard American diet? I think so. But it depends on what you were eating, and it depends on how prone you are to B12 deficiencies and iron deficiencies. I think in the short run, it's better than what most people are doing. And in regards to I don't really want to discuss how to supplement an ideal vegan diet because there are literally certain things you cannot get, and that's a bit off topic, but it's definitely something I can go into.
Seems like everyone needs to have some sort of nutritional plan, and it seems like the biggest factor in all this is, avoiding junk food, which is all the same stuff we hear all the time. So potentially if you're on a vegan diet, you may be avoiding some junk food, but there's ways of doing a vegan diet where you're not avoiding junk food. There's also a keto diet where you could potentially be avoiding junk food, but there's also, you could be doing a keto diet and having some kind of dirty keto foods in there, things that have sugar alcohols in them and whatnot. But whatever the case is, whether you're doing carnivore, vegan, keto, paleo, it's probably still a better decision than a standard American diet. It's still we're still probably eliminating some excess junk, maybe some excess sugar, excess processed foods, and we're probably ultimately limiting some calories. Do you think calories factor into any of this at all when you start to really look at the different diets and things like that?
Yeah, one interesting thing to look at in the context of calories is how your body assimilates nutrition from plant foods versus animal foods. What people notice when they go on a keto diet or a carnivore diet versus a vegan diet, the volume of food that you need to consume versus the amount of food you expel is drastically different. So the caloric intake, when increasing your plant food consumption, it can definitely go down. And I mean, there are arguments going either way. There are people that go on a keto diet and gain weight. There are people that go on a carnivore diet and gain weight. There are people that go on a vegan diet and gain weight. One thing to note on the vegan diet is the high anti-nutrient content of these foods. Because of things like phytates, which inhibit mineral absorption, oxalates also inhibit mineral absorption. Things like lectins can cause leaky gut. What this essentially does is it causes your body not to absorb the nutrients in the food. Your body loses its ability to digest the food. So there is a concern about certain anti-nutrients in certain grains and legumes specifically on a vegan diet. I mean, this can be alleviated to some degree by fermentation. Of course, it can be made easier by choosing foods with less anti-nutrients. I mean, like carbohydrate sources like sweet potatoes and plantains, and maybe fermented oatmeal would be better choices than kidney beans. That's an example of that. Caloric restriction ties into fasting as well. I mean, I think the overall reason that people consume excess calories and don't lose weight is the lack of nutrients in their diet, and that's affecting their hunger signals. But restricting calories and is definitely a way to become healthier. Even if you're eating, doesn't really matter what you eat. It's definitely an improvement. And one way to go about this is whenever you put something in your body, it's always a net loss. It doesn't matter how healthy the food is. It doesn't matter how good the food is for you. You're always doing something negative to your body because either way, you're putting stress on your digestive system. You're putting stress on your cells to eat something. So whether you put something in your body or not, it's just a matter of arguing how negative it is.
Yeah,
food like liver.
The act of eating itself causes inflammation, period.
Yes, that's I mean, that's a very loose statement, and it can be used in a negative connotation in a weird way, because obviously we need to eat food, but this is where we assess the inflammatory response to the food, whether it's just based on its inherent profile of nutrients, anti-nutrients, whether you have an allergy to it, as well as the caloric density of the food. That's, we look at the food. Is it going to give you issues? What's the nutrient density? Two things really, just inflammation, nutrients. So looking at a food like liver or salmon roe, if you tried to eat fish eggs, you wouldn't get past a quarter pound of them. That's because of the nutrient density of the food. And that's a lower caloric restriction. So, you can make arguments that if people were eating a nutrient dense diet and had proper satiation and proper appetite, that they wouldn't be over consuming calories and they wouldn't be stressing their digestive system in an artificial amount. This also ties into lean body mass and bodybuilding, because when you have a higher lean body mass, your body requires more nutrition and more sustenance. So your body will crave protein macronutrients more than fat or micronutrients. So, when I used to lift weights or like you guys, even if you guys fulfill your micronutrient requirements, you guys are going to want way more protein than the average person just from that. Your body, your muscles are literally telling you, I need protein. I want to eat protein. That's not the same case with most people. But fasting is a whole, that's a big topic in itself with autophagy. And the main benefits of autophagy is people claim that, and it's not a claim, this is what it does. Your body essentially recycles its cells and it heals itself in autophagy. But my argument behind a nutrient-dense diet is that the processes that regulate how cells are made, gene expression and cell differentiation, are directly correlative to the cell health in your body. So vitamin A and vitamin D3 in particular are the precursors to gene expression. Gene expression turns on and off certain genes. This literally tells your body what cells it needs to make, whether it's a stem cell or a red blood cell or a white blood cell. I don't want to go, I'm not a biochemist or physiologist. I don't want to go into this too much, but one anecdote I like to make is when I had terrible cystic acne, it would take weeks for the acne to heal. And then when I had this terrible, nickel-sized blemish on my face, that blemish would take 3, 4, 5, 6 months to go away. I did a video on my YouTube of I had a cyst. It exploded. And this is a little gross. I'm sorry, guys. So anyway, the point is I healed my skin in literally 3 days. I went from a cyst on my face to pretty much clear skin. And the way I did this was I fasted. I consumed a large amount of retinol from liver, vitamin A, and then I went in the sun for 5, 6 hours a day. So what happened was, the first day it kind of got inflamed and then it popped. And the second day it started healing. Third day it formed into a scab. And the third day, the second day it turned into a scab. And then the third day it was pretty much completely healed and the blemish was almost gone. So our body essentially is like a plant. When people are growing something, they don't blame the plant's genetics on it not growing. They blame the soil. They blame the nutrients it was given. They say it didn't get enough water. We kind of need to look at the same thing for humans, because genetics are determined by environment over a period of years and years and years. That was a bit of a ramble from the original question of, do calories matter? But I think I touched on it on a few different ways.
I think a lot of people would be curious, especially looking into, you don't eat any vegetables or anything like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I'm not against them, though.
You're not against them?
Yeah.
Cool. A lot of people would wonder, because I think I saw a video where you mentioned how fiber isn't necessarily that important. How would you explain that to individuals, in terms of do you get fiber from outside sources, or is that important to you at all?
No. So in regards to fiber's association with any sort of health benefits, such as reducing cholesterol, what was it usually associated with? Reducing cholesterol, more consistent bowel movements, reducing rates of bowel cancer. That's not actually demonstrated in studies. But to me, fiber does play a role in the health of the gut microbiome and building a diverse microbiome. And that ties into, the thousands and hundreds of wild plant foods that indigenous people used to consume.
Yeah.
So having a certain gut bacteria, your gut bacteria is essentially specific to your, in the case of, let's say a mother has a baby and starts nursing her child. The mother is eating certain foods in her diet that are in a way introduced to the child through the breast milk, the environment. Then when the child grows up, the child would eat the foods that are in the mother's environment. And this is kind of what determines our gut microbiome. So the role that fiber plays in this gut microbiome is just inherently being in those foods that they needed to eat to survive. And I think survival is a big overarching thing here. A lot of the foods we used to eat were really because we didn't want to die from a caloric standpoint. But fiber from a mechanistic standpoint in the body, the only thing that's hypothetically beneficial is feeding some sort of positive gut bacteria. And in actual cases where people have digestive issues, especially things like diverticulitis, as well as IBS, reducing fiber actually improves their gut health.
Mm. What about performance? We're just talking about like lifting weights or athletics. What are some of your thoughts on utilizing a carnivore diet for these things? And does it also make some sense for somebody to add in some carbohydrates at some point, or do you think people don't really need them?
So I had a conversation with an exercise physiologist about this, and he claimed that carbohydrates are not beneficial in any way whatsoever, that a meat and fat diet would be better. But I am not necessarily, that is not my method of thinking. My method of thinking is your body needs to produce enzymes to digest food, whether it's pepsin for protein, lipase for fat, the starch digesting enzymes as well. Your body can only digest a certain amount of each macronutrient at any point in time. And when you're a high performance athlete and you're consuming an unnatural amount of food in regards to what maybe your body frame or your genetics allow you to do, obviously someone like Thor, those strongman guys, is what I exactly think of when I think of this stuff. I'm thinking, okay, these guys have a very, very high lean body mass. They require an incredibly unrealistic amount of food. Now, what would answer your question is, can we actually figure out whether the body can absorb only fat and protein faster than it can absorb the combination of fat, protein, and carbohydrates? Is there a bottleneck on the pepsin production in the body? Is there a bottleneck on these protease, protein digesting enzymes, amylase, carbohydrate digesting enzymes? Is the body bottlenecked in producing these enzymes as well as insulin? Or can the body actually produce just as much of these digestive enzymes as it needs in the context of an animal foods based diet? I think this is going to be anecdotal. If you're not a super high performance athlete, I really don't think this will make a difference. Once you achieve a certain amount of activity and muscle mass, then you might notice, if you consume carbohydrates and you're on a carnivore diet and you notice a performance increase, I think you're at that threshold where your digestive enzymes cannot keep up with just a protein and fat diet.
That actually makes a lot of sense. And I think, bodybuilding purposes, I think some people talk about like, getting a pump, and a lot of bodybuilding coaches will say that's critical, in your training. And then from a powerlifting perspective or strongman perspective, it's my belief that it's just important to have body weight on you. So this may be against what most people are looking for. Most people are, a lot of people are looking to get smaller or lose body fat, lose weight. But for a power lifter or for a strongman athlete or even some MMA athletes, it might be important for them to stay in a particular weight class. So therefore, they might need some of the carbohydrates. And like you said, I think it was pretty accurate account of what you said. Basically, the carbohydrates could be a fast-acting energy source. They could help them potentially recover from workouts. Some people are doing 2 workouts a day. So how are you going to get the fat and protein to really kind of like shuttle into your system? Maybe it does make some sense to have some fruit or some coconut water or something in between workouts. Whatever carbohydrate source you choose will probably be appropriate enough to kind of replenish some of those stores and get you into that next workout, get you kind of repaired from the previous workout.
There's so many factors here, because when you think about what your body needs to recover and perform, you don't only need protein to repair the muscle tissue. You don't only need fat for energy. There's also nutrients. There's the electrolytes. There's a lot of factors that go into this. And on one hand, I really do want to know what would happen if someone like, Brian Shaw or Hafthor Bjornsson went on like a high nutrient carnivore diet. 100% they're losing a lot of weight. The question is, how much strength would they lose and what the adjustment period would be? Unfortunately, I don't think that's something that I don't think it'd be possible to do that in the context of these people, because it would just be too detrimental to their essentially professional career. But I'd love to see some more research being done on this in the future, because the metabolism of protein and fat and energy is definitely something that's not understood by a lot of people.
Yeah, we're seeing it more and more with like kind of endurance athletes, people that run, people that do rowing and things like that. And we're getting really good accounts of what these people are doing and the response that they're having, and it seems like it's a good one. But yeah, we don't know what it looks like, from an NBA basketball player or NFL football player or, high level strongman athlete.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been consulting with a collegiate basketball player, and what we do for him is we increase the nutrient density, but we still keep some carbohydrates in the diet. So we essentially have a very high nutrient carnivore diet, but then he has things like sweet potatoes, high quality grains, maybe some more dairy products, maybe honey occasionally, just things for the carbohydrate metabolism in the body.
What are some of your thoughts on this, Nsima, from having a bodybuilding background and being someone that does jujitsu and you lift? I mean, you have a pretty busy schedule, with the amount of physical activity that you have. Have you explored any of this? Have you tried just to only eat like almost keto and just only eat meat?
Yeah, no, I have for the past 2 weeks or so, I've started messing with much lower carbohydrates. So I haven't cut my carbs out, but having probably a minimum of like 50 or 60 a day, which is much lower than I usually have in the past in terms of my macronutrient intake. And unlike Frank, I mainly have paid attention to my macronutrient intake to make sure that I have intake for enough food to fuel my workouts, because a lot of days I'll come here, then I'll go to jiu-jitsu afterwards. And oddly enough, I found having much lower carbohydrates but much higher fats didn't really affect my energy levels that much. I did feel a little bit of an effect in the gym, but at least in terms of my cardio on the mats, it didn't affect me that much. But what I really am curious about is, because something I never paid much attention to in the past has been my quality of meats. I've heard about you guys talk about this a lot, grass-fed versus, grain-fed meats.
Yeah.
I never paid attention to that. And I'm just wondering how important that is in terms of potential performance or quality of meat. Because personally, again, I just make sure that I'm eating enough food, right? My macronutrient intake. I do take a few supplements here and there to make sure I get my D3 in.
I thought you were natural, bro.
I got to take no subs, but like my D3, etc. But I haven't paid attention to making sure my meat is grass fed. I know, Frank, that you've talked a lot about grain fed meats are not good at all. How does that tie in? Does that tie into performance or any of that type of stuff?
Yeah, no, I'm smiling here because this is this topic in general is what my main focus is. So one thing to look at is, if you look at those indigenous groups and what they ate, and you analyze the foods by amount and the micronutrient amounts, we can assume that those amounts of foods that they're eating and those micronutrient amounts are what the recommended dietary allowances should actually be. And things like, the human body can produce 100,000 IU of vitamin D3 in the sun, the higher retinol content of these foods. So we can assume that humans have a higher nutrient requirement than what we've been told. Now, when we actually analyze the nutrient content of the food, there's one thing that determines the nutrient content of the food, specifically what the animal was raised on. The example in cows is, and cows have very interesting, ruminant digestion is very interesting. A human would actually have to have 5 gallons of fluid in their stomach fermenting to be the equivalent. But in grass, when a cow goes in the field, it has an incredible sense of smell. It might think clover tastes like ice cream. It might think wheatgrass is a burger. And the cow will actually go in the field and choose, the grasses and the whatever that they like the most. And this is because the nutrient content of those grasses varies. And vitamin A is actually mislabeled on food. In plant foods, it's beta carotene, but they can label it as vitamin A for some reason. The carotenes in this grass convert in the cow's body into retinol in its tissue. So cows are eating the plant form of vitamin A and converting it to the animal form of vitamin A. Same with vitamin K. There's vitamin K1 in grass, and the cow converts vitamin K2 in its body. And this is through fermentation. The gut bacteria eats the grass, ferments, turns into nutrients in the body. So if the cow is being fed a crude soy feed of corn, whatever, cooked corn, cooked soy, things like that, it's not going to have micronutrients. And this is the problem also with a lot of vegetables in modern diets. Replenishing, think of soil as in there's micronutrients soil that aren't necessary for the growth of the plant or the animal, and then there's macronutrient there's macronutrients in the soil that are not necessary for the growth of the plant or the animal, and then there's micronutrients. So, I'm sorry, I'm confusing things completely. You need macronutrients for energy. This is what you need to grow a plant or a human. Micronutrients can be deficient in plants and animals, and they will still grow. So these macronutrients for soil are NPK. One's potassium, one's nitrogen, and I always forget the other one. It's just general fertilizer. So it's nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So you need nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium to grow a plant. So essentially, if you grow corn with nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, and then you feed that corn to a cow, it's not getting those micronutrients in it. The same thing can be said about humans in general and how we are raised on low micronutrient foods. So basically, how the food was raised determines the nutrient content. So if the cow wasn't eating grass, it might not have a high nutrient content. And in the context of grain-fed versus grass-fed, yeah, I mean, on paper, grass-fed is going to have vitamins that grain-fed isn't going to have. The fatty acid profile is going to be better. But you have to consider the muscle isn't really where the nutrients are stored. The nutrients in the animal are stored in the fat. That's why they're called fat-soluble vitamins. They're not called protein-soluble vitamins. The muscle tissue stores minerals and elements, and if there's fat intertwined between the muscle tissue, there is nutrients in that fat. But if you take a grain-fed steak with a ton of fat on it and a lean grass-fed steak, the nutrient content is going to be insignificant because there's no fat on the grass-fed steak. This is where, when you're eating muscle meat primarily, you're not really looking at a nutrient-dense source compared to the fat. And when you look at what our ancestors ate, ribeye and ground beef didn't exist because animals don't actually store fat in those parts. That's because of how we've bred cattle, other factors. Fat in the animal is stored on the belly, on the brisket, on the short rib, around the kidneys, those fatty parts of the animal, around the organ tissues. That's where we would have had to obtain fat and calories in nature. So the whole grain-fed versus grass-fed debate in the context of eating a steak isn't nearly as relevant as it is in the overall diet. And the primary fat-soluble vitamins that we're concerned about getting, it's not really, we have vitamin A in the form of retinol, probably the most underappreciated vitamin, the most important vitamin that's going to be discovered, I think, really in regards to people understanding that you need to get it in large amounts. Vitamin D3, of course, we don't have to touch on that anymore. Vitamin K2 is a big one. Vitamin K2 ties into vitamin D3 and calcium metabolism. So in order to absorb calcium in your body, you need vitamin D3. But in order to move calcium around tissue, you need vitamin K2. I think it's called matrix GLA protein, MGP, it binds to calcium ions in the body and moves them around. And vitamin K2, vitamin K2 is the secret of a lot of these indigenous groups and some animal foods, because vitamin K2 is only present in high quality animal foods. And what we mean by this is if an animal is not grass-fed or raised properly, the vitamin K2 content will be lower. But what's more important about K2 is its presence in fermented foods. So although foods like egg yolks and liver have some vitamin K2, when you ferment a food, it increases the vitamin K2 content. And the one thing that I can't get past in my mind is that there's a really good book, The Indigenous Foods of the South Sudan, The Fat of the Land. All of these indigenous people, whether it's the Eskimos or the Africans, they purposely rotted their meat. And I mean, in modern society, we eat things like cheese and ham and yogurt. We eat a lot of rotten foods all the time, and we don't really think twice about it. But these people would literally take fish, leave them out in the sun for 7 days, and then eat it. And you might say, okay, that's the anthropological evidence. What's the logical evidence? Okay, maybe 100 years ago, we wouldn't have had refrigeration. What's the scientific evidence? The protein breaks down, it becomes more digestible. Well, there's 3 enzymes in meat, fat hydrolyzing enzymes, proteolytic enzymes, and the glycolytic enzymes. The fat hydrolyzing enzymes ferment the fat. The proteolytic enzymes ferment the protein. And the glycolytic enzymes, when the animal dies, the lactic acid, the glucose in the meat turns into lactic acid. That's why sometimes people think liver has carbs in it, but that's not actually true because the glycolytic enzyme breaks down the glucose in the liver into lactic acid when the animal dies. So these enzymes ferment meat in a way that's more favorable to the human microbiome. So not only are you breaking down the protein, you're fermenting the fat, and you're turning certain nutrients into vitamin K2 essentially. So there's definitely a role in indigenous groups of these vitamins, and there's definitely an importance of these vitamins in overall health. But this is something that is, we know it's present in their diets. It makes sense on a paper value perspective that you can't really obtain these vitamins in any way from plant foods. And anecdotally speaking, when I eat these foods, and a lot of my clients, when they eat these foods, they notice a difference. When you sit down and you eat certain foods, you notice immediately how you feel. So definitely, some people like saying I speak out my ass. Some people like saying, but I try to give as much information as physically possible. If I can explain it in any way whatsoever, I do it, and I'm also open-minded to the contrary. But again, it's one of those topics where if people haven't heard about it and they come across all this information about it from someone, and this is not something that it's like I read a book and I started. This is when I'm on the street, this is literally what I'm thinking about. When I'm driving in my car somewhere, this is what I think about. I have ideas and things I write down every single day. This is an accumulation of like 7 years of doing this. And all that information is accumulated into essentially a 5-minute blurb on why vitamins are important. So that's why I like to say, as I said earlier, present the information, let people do the research on their own. But there's definitely a lot of if I could talk for 2 hours just on vitamin A. There's so much to touch on. It's just absolutely insane.
When you are talking about these different fermented foods, how do you personally have fermented food? You mentioned that you have trouble with dairy. I think fermented food. One way to get it is through like yogurt or kefir or but what are some other options people can look into?
Mm-hmm. So obviously, if you guys haven't realized I'm crazy yet, it's called high meat, and this is what the indigenous groups used to call it because it makes you high when you eat it. And meat can actually be inadvertently rotten. So if you bought like ikura or salmon roe in a store, if it was salted and fermented and you ate it, it would give you that similar feeling. Obviously, so the two easiest access foods for K2 are egg yolks and cheese. Egg yolks have vitamin K2 in the form of MK4. That's the form that's present in animal foods when they're not fermented. And then it turns into MK7 when it's fermented. MK7K2 is the fermented form. And there's evidence that you kind of need MK7 as well. So cheese has high amounts of MK7. Cheese is really kind of the best source of food that most people have access to, unless you want to start eating duck liver or goose liver. And that's because migratory birds have a very interesting function of their metabolism where they store fat in their liver for the winter. So when these ducks fatten up, they're also storing vitamin K2 in their liver. That's why emu oil is a very popular supplement product. Emu oil has a high K2 content. It has benefits to it. But cheese is interesting and I guess we could talk about quality of dairy here. So the difference between the dairy on the supermarket shelf and a raw grass-fed dairy product is, first of all, there's no inherent nutrient content to the dairy product if the animal wasn't on pasture. So we can kind of cross a lot of that off. When the dairy is homogenized, it's a much larger fat particle than sheep milk or goat milk. So when you shrink down this protein particle, it can get through the gut lining and be more inflammatory to people that have cow's milk allergies. And you're also pasteurizing the milk, although that can kill bacteria that the farmer might, bacteria in milk and concerns about bacteria are generally from poor cross-contamination practices, like they didn't clean the milking machines, things like that. So although pasteurization does that, it reduces the nutrient content. And when you pasteurize a food, you're cooking it, and a raw food ferments naturally. A cooked food oxidizes and rots and forms harmful bacteria. So if you have a raw piece of meat on the counter for a couple hours, that's fine. But if you cook that piece of meat and you lay it out, that's how people get sick. So cheese, in specific cases, it's made with the rennet of the animal. And, baby calves have rennet in their stomach that curdles the milk into cheese, essentially. It's pretty interesting. Like I wouldn't mean not to be cruel, but if you cut open a baby cow, there would essentially be cheese in their stomach. And the way that cheese is made, you take this ideally raw, high quality grass-fed milk product, you add the rennet to it, it forms cheese, and then you age it, and that aging process adds K2. And if people want to get a good source of K2 in their local supermarket, there's usually plenty of raw imported cheeses. Parmigiano Reggiano is a DOP. It's a designation of protection, which means they can only make the milk from certain cows in certain areas, and that has to be made a certain way. And that Parmigiano Reggiano DOP guarantees essentially that it is a raw cow's milk cheese, that it is a very high quality source of nutrition. So that's a very easily accessible one, but generally any raw imported cheeses are what people should look for in the supermarket. But since I am allergic to cheese, what I essentially do is I will take any really animal meat, animal fat, and I'll put it in a jar and I'll pretty much let it ferment. And guys, I am not crazy. Like, a lot of this stuff came across in a weird way. So one time I bought some beef fat from a farm and it smelled like Parmesan cheese. And I was like, and then like, I didn't eat it. I just left it there. And then I smelled like rotten. It smelled like a dead body in my kitchen the day later. And I was like, what is that? Is that the fat? So I go open the fat up and it smells like a combination. It's cheese is funky. It's rotten. It really is. So I tasted this beef fat and I swear to God, it tasted exactly like Parmesan cheese. Obviously, the texture was different, but I was like, "That's really interesting." If you ferment fat, even from an animal, any animal, it develops similar flavors of the cheese. And a good example of this is people that eat dry aged steak. Almost all steaks are dry aged now, but you go to a steakhouse, you have a dry aged steak. It's essentially a rotten piece of meat. I mean, obviously, the fermentation process is way different, but that's definitely an interesting element of my diet that I haven't really incorporated for most of my carnivore dietary history. The importance of it is something I'm focusing on now, mainly because of the food access thing. You know, for me to have rotten jars of meat and do that is completely crazy compared to going to a store and buying cheese. That's for sure.
And vitamin K, it can, you were mentioning basically how it can help, I guess, metabolize calcium or help kind of move along calcium, but it can be really beneficial to your heart. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very. It's important in blood health, but when so in regards to the actual metabolism of vitamin K in blood health, I know it reduces blood clotting. That's for sure. I think I'm going to look up the metabolism of that real quick, but one thing I do like to touch on in regards to blood health is specifically omega-3 fatty acids. So there's a really interesting book called The Eskimo Diet. And the one analogy I like to start this conversation with is if you cut an Eskimo's arm, it would take them 8 to 9 minutes for their blood to clot. An American would take 3 to 4 minutes. And you might think, oh, that's a bad thing. They're going to bleed to death. No, that's a testament to how smooth their blood flows. So what omega-3 fatty acid consumption does to the blood is it changes the structure of the blood cells. It makes them more pliable. They can squeeze through arteries better. Blood cells are actually much larger than a lot of the tiny arteries, not arteries, but the tiny veins and vessels they go through, and they need to squeeze and be flexible. Omega-3 improves the flexibility of this. It reduces the fibrinogen in your blood, it makes your blood flow quicker. And it's really just an overall ability to bind to calcium. Not omega-3, but the K2's ability is really that binding to calcium and taking it out of the blood is reducing a lot of inflammatory stress. Ironically, the video I did yesterday was on calcium and showing how calcium deposits in kidneys and the heart are really a result of not getting enough vitamin K2. And one overarching thing that I say a lot is the calcium RDA and the idea that calcium builds strong bones is one of the biggest mistakes of our generation. A calcium RDA being high is actually a consequence of us not getting enough of these vitamins in our diet. I have not consumed any calcium in 6.5 years, and my blood levels of calcium are right dead in the middle. It's like 9.4 on a scale of 8.2 to 10.6.
Yeah, it's so interesting once you start to eliminate a lot of other foods from your diet. It's really crazy how the blood work starts to really kind of mend together and almost like fix itself. You don't really lift anymore nowadays. You basically just run, right? And what's the kind of reason behind that? Like, we love lifting, and we also understand that, like, the way that we like to lift, we might be beating ourselves up a little bit, and maybe it's not going to help us necessarily live to 100? Did you do it for like longevity purposes, or why did you just kind of switch things up?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot, and been having this conversation myself with the past few days actually, because I have obviously marketing myself from a health nutrition perspective. There's also a fitness aspect, and if I don't work out and I don't lift weights, I'm kind of missing some sort of clientele in a way. So on one hand, I wanted to lift weights again for that purpose. On the other hand, I mean, I work as a bartender. I do my YouTube channel. I have another job that I work on the side. I can get in the gym for an hour or two a day. That's not too much of an issue. But the extra eating, I'm gonna lose 3-4 hours of sleep a day. That's my personal reason. I've always had really bad stretch marks on my arms, and I know that sounds silly, but that's never gonna go away. So that's not actually a good reason, because regardless of my muscle, I always have the bad stretch marks. I think with my small bone frame right now, I'm like 5'9", 140 pounds. For me, I have very small. I'm sure you guys are familiar with the term small joints. I'm sure you could explain it better than other people. I have really small joints. So when I have 16, 17-inch arms, that's not like on one of you guys, like your arms are probably like 18, 19, not 18, 19, but like 20, 21 inches. You guys are gigantic. When I have 16, 17-inch arms, I look really, really big, at least for my bone frame. And I actually did a physique competition back in 2015. I mean, on my own, I looked okay. But if you put me next to those guys, you'd be like, what is that guy doing on the stage? So the bone frame, even if I lifted weights and I kept lifting weights, my peak muscle tone for my frame is only going to be 180, 190 pounds max. So with my small bone frame and how I look it's way too muscular. Part of that ties into, fitting into my suits. That was honestly like a reason. Like I don't fit in. Like I could retailer all my suits, but then what if I don't want to lift weights again? A lot of maintenance things. But in regards to the actual physical reasons about why lifting weights might be detrimental, the only concern is, to me, you need to consume excess calories to put on muscle. And as we said earlier, anything you eat is inherently inflammatory. That's one element to it. But there's so many benefits of lifting weights. It's hard to say that it's bad, because when you go into a gym, the people that are in shape are not on the treadmill. The people that are in shape are lifting the weights. And one fact that was really shocking to me, I mean, I always knew muscle burned a lot of calories, but 1 pound of muscle burns 50 calories a day. So if someone put in a 1.5, 2 year time span for a natural, metabolism is going to increase 1,000, 1,500 calories depending on the amount of muscle they put on. And that will literally help them lose all the weight they need to lose. So there's another element to this, though, is we are much less muscular than a hunter-gatherer. These people would have been much more muscular than we are now. So getting into the gym and doing this weightlifting is a way to make up for sedentary activity. If you stand, if you're if I'm a bartender and I'm moving around all day, shaking up drinks, doing this, doing that, and I used to work as a personal trainer too, but the point is, if you're active on your feet all day doing things, building muscle inherently through endurance activity, you're going to have a decent lean body mass. But if you're sitting at a desk all day, the only way for you to make up for that 7-8 hour day of sedentary activity is for you to go in the gym and kill yourself for an hour. So I don't think there's any detriment to weight training. Obviously, if you're in the realm of, you want to try to deadlift your house and like rip up some plyboards, that's a different conversation. Like I used to do that stuff. I was never really that strong. I bench pressed like low 300s and deadlifted like maybe in the low 400s after training for a couple of years. I was never in. My brother's a bit more into the powerlifting stuff himself. I think he deadlifts in the 500s. I don't know what his numbers are, but
you're part of some triplets. Is that right?
Oh, this is so funny. I always forget to bring this up, but being a triplet is a pretty unique thing. So, we're all 27. My brother is out. He's an engineer, works in aerospace. My sister, unfortunately, is mentally disabled. So I do work with her. And, part of the reason that I do this whole nutrition thing is because I have a belief that, nutritional deficiencies can cause things like that. Not to say that that was the reason my sister was, that whole story about how my mother had kids, they botched the C-section and she ended up having to get like a double kidney transplant. That's a whole different story. So my sister isn't necessarily the reason, and my belief in nutrient density is the reason, but seeing modern medicine, how we're living now, how unhappy people are just even on the street, all of this stuff has been a driving factor in my message to just get people healthier in general. My thought is if someone's healthy, if someone's energetic, that's part of the problem. If we make sure everyone has a certain quality of life, in regards to improving the world in itself, it's so much different. I remember when I went to what did I do? One day I went into, it just seemed, I felt like everyone around me was on edge besides myself. Like I went into a butcher shop and I was just like holding my hand. I was like, hey man, what's going on? Do you guys have, and he was like, hold on a second. The guy was like freaking out, and then I went, then like I'm driving my car and these people act like lunatics. Just the behavior that people portray in general to me is so absolutely crazy. And I drive in Manhattan. There's something wrong with me.
I was going to say, you're in New York.
Yeah, no, I mean, there is something wrong with me, but there's like a different level of anxiety that people have that I haven't noticed in myself or healthy and reasonable people. I guess a good way to coin this is a lot of people are emotionally driven. And that's part of the reason they also don't really care about their health too much. And, if you can't fix yourself, how are you supposed to fix other things? I mean, of course, there 99% of these people on this planet don't eat a healthy diet and they're doing amazing things. But I just feel like out of context, a lot of times when I go places and just seeing how people act, how unhealthy people are, how unhappy people are. And that's hopefully, and I'm doing it well so far, improving people's lives in that regard.
Have you ever seen Ghostbusters 2?
Listen, man, I've seen Ghostbusters 1. I haven't seen Ghostbusters 2.
So the second Ghostbusters, it takes place in New York City, and underneath the city is all this pink slime. And as people are getting more on edge and as people are getting more pissed off, this pink slime is rising up and it's mounting. And I think that the pink slime represents carbohydrates and sugar and processed foods. And I really honestly feel that like this is bringing people to a fucking boiling point. And I couldn't agree with you more on like the sanity of people. Like I walk through the airport and a lot of times just in general, just smile at people. Like, it's every once in a while I have resting bitch face, but for the most part, I try to be pretty happy because I feel like if you smile, it kind of makes you feel happy on the inside and brings your mood up. And why not acknowledge the person that's walking across from you or whatever? Why not kind of give people a head nod or smile a little bit? People look at you like they just want to punch you right in the fucking face sometimes.
They really do.
And it's like, man, what's this guy's problem? Maybe he needs to get on a carnivore diet. I don't know.
Y'all don't have
I went to the UPS store earlier and I saw this. I mean, this maybe middle-aged Asian lady walking out of the UPS store. I walk into the UPS store. I go out. I go to the post office. And I see her at the post office. I was like, "Oh, hey, what's going on?" We both had the same idea, and she was like, she was just looking at me with like a death stare, and I was like, then I explained to her, I was like, "Oh no, you were just UPS." She was just in a haze. It wasn't even that. She was just in a haze of confusion. I'm sure she didn't even notice me when I was there, and I noticed most people are in this haze of confusion. And is it the sugar, the carbohydrates, the refined foods? Of course, but I'd be curious to see if these people had a base amount of nutrients in their diet. That's probably part of it too. That's my main contribution.
Before the show, we were actually talking about raw meats and eating raw meats, and my family wouldn't F with that. Like, like straight up, just like you cannot convince an African family to eat.
I definitely have to touch on this. Yeah,
raw meat. But Andrew mentioned something funny that I never really thought about. I eat sushi, and
of course, that's a big one.
Yeah, I eat raw fish. So what is this like adversity to like eating a straight up raw steak, right? So
this is a whole nother big topic in itself. This is for the indigenous example, all indigenous groups ate cooked, raw, smoked. They ate all types of meat.
Yeah.
Every indigenous group, every single way, raw, every way. Logically speaking, on a scientific basis, what happens when you cook meat is you reduce the micronutrient content to some degree. Let's say you cook a steak well done, which most people don't do, so the nutrient degradation isn't this severe. If you cook a steak well done, broil in the oven for an hour, you lose about 50% of the B vitamins and 20 to 30% of the other fat-soluble vitamins. Now, of course, if you cook a steak rare, that's not as big of an issue. But what you're doing by cooking the steak is you're concentrating the calories. So you're sacrificing micronutrients and you're increasing caloric density. This is very important for survival because, when I tried the raw primal diet, I started craving meat. I started, not meat, I started craving cooked meat. I started craving salt. There's a caloric need. And consuming only raw meat products, they like bottlenecks that caloric need in the diet. So if you're consuming a carnivore diet, there's no indigenous group that was really, there are very few that were completely carnivore. And even those that, if an indigenous group had unlimited access to animal foods, they would still only eat 80% of their calories or so from animal foods. So this means that, okay, if you only need to eat maybe 30 to 48% of your calories from animal foods to get enough nutrition in the diet, it doesn't really matter if you cook your meat and reduce the nutrient content by a certain amount because you're still getting the nutrients in. Does that make sense? So if you need to get a certain amount of nutrients and cooking the food reduces the nutrients by half, why not just eat double the amount? That's what you can essentially do. So what you're doing is you're getting more calories, but you're getting less micronutrients. There are some nutrients that you do lose. Like if you really cook a piece of meat long, vitamin C content is lost, and meat does have vitamin C. For anyone that doesn't know that, there's a couple nutritional databases that do indicate that. And certain, usually the water soluble vitamins are more prone to oxidation. Vitamin D3 is a bit more prone to oxidation in heat as well. Now the bacteria thing and the parasite thing is certainly a big one to talk about. So Salmonella and E. coli. Salmonella occurs only in chicken. That's pretty important to note. Chickens carry salmonella. I'm assuming it's because even though a lot of animals are kept in horrendous conditions, chickens are kept in even worse conditions. E. coli is present in, I'm sure more people get E. coli from romaine lettuce than they do from eating meat. And there's a lot of recalls around, but this is all cross-contamination. People don't realize that a lot of these very low-paid workers literally have to use the bathroom in the fields, and sometimes that gets in people's vegetables. People don't realize what's going into, where the meat's going, what's going into that ground meat. I've been eating meat for 6.5, 7 years on this diet, and I've never been sick once from raw meat. That being said, I've never eaten ground meat from the supermarket raw. That is definitely a good way to get E. coli. And another thing to touch on is the strains of these bacteria. So if a grass-fed animal has E. coli, the strain is different. When you feed a cow grain, you increase the acidity of their rumen, one of their stomachs. This makes the E. coli bacteria more resistant to acid. Normally, the E. coli that occurs in a grass-fed animal is going to be killed in your digestive tract. It won't be as harmful. But that acid-resistant strain of E. coli, that will wreak havoc on your digestive system. It's interesting how feeding these animals different foods affects their meat quality too. Since ruminants have a different digestive system than chickens, the omega-3 to omega-6 in grain-fed beef is far more favorable than the omega-3 to omega-6 in grain-fed chicken. But things like chicken and pork are supposed to have essentially the same omega ratios as things like grass-fed beef and wild-caught fish. It's just to have those animals on that quality of pasture is really cost prohibitive at this point. So the bacterial concerns have a lot to do with cross-contamination and how we're raising our animals. If you go out and you hunt a deer and you killed that deer, granted it didn't have some sort of infection, all that meat is going to be free of any modern bacterial issues. So if I need to touch more on bacteria, I can, but the parasites are what scare people. And on one of my raw meat eating days, a video, people were like, oh, parasite has entered YouTube or something. Like they're making jokes that I'm going to get parasites. And as someone who's works in restaurants, who's been a fish cutter, who's been, cuts meat, I know what animals parasites occur in. So parasites in ruminant animals, has anyone, listen, any of you guys listening right now, if you've seen a parasite in a steak, please let me know, because I've seen hundreds and hundreds and thousands of pounds of meat and I have not. I don't even want to bring this up because it's not really a concern, but an animal can be infested with liver flukes. And these are, I think it's like snails and marshlands carry these, and then the cow eats the grass, and then they get liver flukes in their liver. But if a cow has liver flukes, it's not going to get past the butcher. they're going to see the liver's infected, the animal's sick. It's not going to get the meat is not going to get past. I'm sure you could Google pigs have cancer, and you could see meat with cancer in it, and you could see stuff like that. That stuff does not get past the butcher, thankfully. The big concern, the only thing I have seen worms and parasites in is fish. And it's funny because people do eat sushi, but people will go. I'm sure. I wonder how many people have said, "Oh, you're going to get sick from eating raw steak," and then they go to have sushi the next day, and they don't realize that sushi is actually a lot easier to get sick from.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, if you freeze meat at a certain temperature, it will kill the parasite. But parasites in fish are very, very normal, especially in larger ocean fish. If I filleted open a salmon and I didn't find a roundworm in the belly or a nematode in the belly, I would be surprised. The nematodes that occur, the roundworms that occur, they're non-segmented roundworms that occur in salmon aren't harmful to humans because they can't really burrow through the intestine. They can cause a stomach upset if they get through. But this is like if you get sold a piece of meat and there's a worm in it and it gets past the butcher, it gets past your inspection, it's kind of your fault for not really looking at the meat carefully. And if you're not looking at the meat carefully and slicing it thin, then you probably want to cook it a little bit to some degree. And the worms that are actually an issue, there are some segmented tapeworms, but those occur in freshwater fish. But, salmon do go upstream and in rivers, so they can have tapeworms. But these tapeworms are much, much, much larger. And so this ties into the butcher thing. It's not going to get past the butcher. When they cut open this salmon, it's going to be so infested that the meat is not consumable. If you guys really want to get grossed out anymore, you can watch parasite videos on YouTube. But a really good resource for this is the CDC, Center for Disease Control. You can type in any parasite, any animal, any disease you're concerned about. It will give you statistics on how frequently people get sick. It will give you statistics on parasite occurrence rates, on bacterial infection rates, what foods they come from, and you'll find that it's mostly plants. I didn't want to forget about trichinosis as well as prion diseases. So trichinosis, I think that's from feeding, a lot of the time it's from feeding animals garbage. But the main concern for trichinosis is a wild game meat. So unless you're eating bear meat or wild boar meat, you shouldn't really worry about trichinosis. Pork used to have trichinosis because how poorly we treat our animals. So if you're going to consume pork, unless you're raising the animal yourself and you got the animal tested for trichinosis when you slaughtered it, I wouldn't start doing any raw pork. But there are a lot of countries that do consume raw pork and they raise animals specifically to consume it raw. Same thing with chicken. People eat plenty of raw chicken. But prion diseases are really interesting because prions are misfolded proteins and you can't kill these things. You could heat it. You could throw them in a substance in the environment that does not go away. Joe Rogan had this a podcast on this with an expert on prion diseases and chronic wasting disease in deer. And these proteins, essentially, these prions folds tissue in your brain and essentially makes holes in your brain. Now, in the context of mad cow disease and consuming it and having an issue, there has never been one case of mad cow disease in the United States. All of the cases were from people who consumed meat in another country, and then they came over here and were diagnosed with the disease. I've heard many very shady stories about the origin of mad cow disease, but to my understanding, they fed sheep that had scrappy, which is the form of mad cow in sheep. They fed sheep meal to cows, and then they developed the bovine form of it. You can also get prion disease, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, if you were like a brain surgeon and then you licked the scalpel. But when people think that they're going to get a prion disease from eating brain tissue, specifically of the animal, that's not true. The prions occur in all the tissues of the animal, although they are more concentrated in the brain and the spinal cord. The prions are in the whole animal itself. So in regards to concerns about actually, day-to-day physical concerns, scrappy I think it's actually called scrapie. I'm an idiot today. It's called scrapie because what happens is the sheep start scraping their bodies against the fence. So scrapie in sheep has not been shown to be transferable to humans. But as we said earlier with these sick animals, these things don't usually get past the butcher. Same then if you cut open a lamb skull and there's holes in the lamb's brain, maybe don't eat it. Pork is actually immune to prion diseases. They have like a genetic immunity to prions. Interesting. I have not eaten. I've eaten calf's brain. What's also interesting to note is mad cow disease cannot occur in an animal until it is past 3 years of age, because it develops over time in the animal. What other brains can you eat? I mean, obviously you don't want to go out and eat a deer that had chronic wasting disease. You don't want to eat their brain or something. I'm sure something might happen there. But the point is, hasn't actually been shown that you can even get prion diseases from other animals outside of humans and cows. And the reason the cow form was transferable to humans is because it was a mutated form of BSE. And the reason you can get, you can get Creutzfeldt Jacobs from eating brain tissue that has Creutzfeldt Jacobs. And also, some people are immune to it in general. That's also interesting to note.
You mentioned that you don't eat raw ground beef. So what's your favorite type of raw meat to eat?
Yeah, I've actually gone to Whole Foods like twice in the past year and eaten raw ground meat. That's on a rare occasion. That's the only time I've ever done it. I go to local Pennsylvania has some. Listen, the Amish people, they're the shit, man. I swear to God, these people raise the animals how they're supposed to be. I bought this ground veal the other day, and I ate this ground veal. I was like, what the fuck? I was like, Jesus Christ, this veal, it was so amazing. The fresh meat raised how it's supposed to be. I just have local farmers. I ask them, hey, what are the cheap offcuts you guys have? Fatty stuff. And I just eat whatever. But, you might think a brisket or a short rib or something has to be cooked a very long period of time. To me, I could cook a brisket medium rare, slice it against the grain, and I can still chew it. I mean, I might have to slice it a little smaller. But my favorite thing to eat from a taste perspective, the tastiest raw foods to me are obviously, raw dairy is delicious. Raw cream, raw butter, raw milk, raw sheep milk. Man, one of my favorite, most delicious foods in the world. But in regards to foods you can cut off of an animal, I really like the bone marrow, can be really tasty. But this ties back to indigenous people. They literally had preferences for every part of the animal. Like they might have liked the lower leg bone marrow raw, the upper leg bone marrow cooked. They might have liked the sheep head boiled and the caribou head roasted over a fire. Very specific food preferences. And when you start tasting these foods and you notice what you like, things taste different. Fat from one part of the animal tastes different than other parts of the animal. But in regards to actual cuts of meat that most people are familiar with, of course, I love ribeye. Ribeye is delicious if it's really fatty. The fat on brisket has a very unique flavor to it. The fat on the belly of the animal, most people eat bacon, has a very unique flavor to it. Every part of the animal has a flavor. I mean, that's the great thing about this diet. When you eat, you could taste if a steak is flank steak, if it's skirt steak, if it's New York strip, filet mignon. You can taste what part of the animal the meat is from. Same thing with the fat. Same thing with the marrow. It's really interesting.
Where should somebody start? Let's say they're grossed out. They think you're disgusting for eating raw stuff and eating raw brains and everything. Where should somebody start just to get some more nutrients in their diet, period, without having to be on too crazy of a schedule?
I want it to be very clear that you don't have to eat raw food to be healthy. Indigenous groups did eat both cooked, raw, fermented food. You can eat a completely cooked food diet. I mean, if you're cooking every single thing to well done, the only thing I would be concerned about is maybe you want some vitamin C in your diet from somewhere else. You don't have to eat raw products. If you're looking to source products, there's some excellent websites like eatwild.com, localharvest.org, where you can look into local farms and farmers markets and see what meat you have accessible. On an easier, relatively speaking term, I literally can go to like all the supermarkets and local butchers in my area. Halal butchers will have lamb, pretty much any part of. I did a video where I tasted every single part of a raw lamb that I slaughtered. There's meat that's easily accessible. You just have to do a little bit of legwork. You have to say, okay, does ShopRite have grass-fed ribeye? Oh, ShopRite has grass-fed ribeye for $9 a pound. It's pretty insane. Does Whole Foods is a different story. I can't afford to eat there myself. I'd probably go broke buying steak at Whole Foods. Maybe you could do ground beef at Whole Foods, but you really have to look at it. We'll start from the easiest. So explore your local options, supermarkets, any sort of wholesale store like Costco. See what they have available. For fish, local Asian markets are a godsend. These guys will have like anything alive that you can imagine that you would eat. They have it there and they will cut it for you. And I mean, even things, they have live kill markets like where I am in Queens and Brooklyn. But the meat quality ties in here. getting the hardest thing to do is to get a quality source of meat, fresh and cheap. You could get frozen stuff. That makes it easier. And once you've explored all those local options, then you can look into farmers markets and local farms. I literally call up farms and I say, hey, how often do you abattoir too? Abattoir is a slaughterhouse. You could call these places up, say, hey, how often do you slaughter an animal? Can I buy X amount of meat per week? If you show people you're willing to spend money and develop these relationships, then you can get these foods. Obviously, no, I do consult a lot of people that don't want to do these things. So there is a way to do it. And like that food I mentioned earlier, raw grass-fed cheese. I mean, the problem with eggs is even if you're going to the supermarket and buying the best pastured omega-3 eggs, they're still being fed predominantly grain feed. The grass-fed meat is not as fresh and good as it could be. So there is a slight sacrifice in quality if you do want easier access to food. But I always like to think there's got to be something wrong with you to do what I do. There has to be.
You got anything else?
But again, yeah, no, I'm sorry. The resources for anyone that's interested, eatwild.com, localharvest.org, realmilk.com is great for finding local milk sources. And then you could even just Google, I would just Google stuff in your area, butcher, abattoir, farm. There's probably a ton of Facebook groups that I don't really mess with.
Andrew, you got any questions over there? What you got, buddy?
No, well, my question was exactly like, how do we get started? But the websites that you mentioned were great, so thank you for that. One thing that I did want to ask, and me and Nsima were talking about it earlier. You mentioned indigenous people and our ancestors and whatnot, and I'm not trying to be combative or anything like that, but if we were just to take like an A/B comparison, and I'll just be super basic and simple with it. We are living longer now, so why is it referenced so much in some of your arguments?
So I actually did a whole video on that the other day explaining that. One thing off the bat, that's not actually a true statistic.
Okay.
The life expectancy now is not too far off of what we used to have. The constituent here is the infant mortality rate. So there were groups of people who would literally have an infant or child mortality rate of 15, 20, 25%. But if you got past that young period of life, you would likely live to 65, 70, 75. And if we look at life, I mean, we can look at blue zones and life expectancy by country and see what foods they consume in general. But the main argument against that is the life expectancy. The other thing I like to bring up is, okay, you can argue, let's say these people did die at 35. Let's say some of them did, because these people are surviving. How long do we think any of us would last in the woods without modern rifles, modern equipment? The fact that these people were able to survive with a bow and arrow in the forest, like to me, that's the craziest thing in general. If these people can survive with a bow and arrow in the forest and procure calories in that way, it's completely amazing. And that ties back into, if you go into a forest, the only thing you will be eating is animal foods, because you didn't have your ancestors to tell you this plant is good, that plant is good, what to eat. There's that element of these people were literally trying to survive. They had very harsh lives. And even in these tribes where they were very skilled and adept at hunting and they were able to procure calories very easily, they still went around killing each other. If you Google Australian Aborigines, cannibals, the natives to Australia, there are some really, really crazy stories that I could talk about on here about what these cannibals used to actually do. And they had beliefs like eating the heart of your enemy would make you stronger, eating their brain would make you smarter. And I mean, listen, the brain tissue of an animal might have omega-3 fatty acids in it, but that doesn't necessarily mean you should, go over to your neighbor's house and have some twisted thoughts going on. But to tie it back to their life expectancy, people don't realize the infant mortality. People don't realize the elements of survival. And the main thing is there's no evidence of degenerative disease in these people. There's no evidence of diabetes. There's no evidence of cancer. There's no evidence of chronic disease. And if you see what they looked like, they look like marble statues. They look like perfect physical specimens in a lot of these pictures. And one interesting thing I bring up is, not to offend any people, have you ever seen a picture of a bald Eskimo or First Nation Alaskan or a bald Native American? These people didn't lose their hair either. That's one interesting thing. It got me thinking, looking up pictures of Native Americans, looking up pictures of these indigenous people, they all look the same in a way. If you think of a species of people that are from a certain area, they kind of look a certain way. And whether or not they developed properly in that way is conducive to their environment. Did I answer that? Did you want me to touch on anything specifically on the life expectancy thing?
No, that's just about it. And it's kind of like the who's better, like was it Jordan, LeBron? Like there's so many different like variables there. Like it's impossible to do an A/B comparison. But no, I think you hit it right on the head, man.
Yeah, and I think too, like I think that we're dying longer is what I said kind of before we got on the show. Is like there's so many people are so sick.
Oh, it's upsetting.
And then people want to say, the life expectancy is higher, and people get excited about that stat, and it's like, well, everybody's on like all these weird drugs, and I think I just go by what I see. I see a lot of people not feeling well. I see a lot of people in wheelchairs and just sickly and just not doing well and having diabetes and heart disease and all these other things. So I think that the message is great, if we can get people to be healthier. And I like your message too, because it's coming from a place of addition. Now, yeah, it would be great to have everybody like wipe out processed foods from their diet. And it'd be awesome if people could have the willpower that you have to not eat a carbohydrate for the last decade. But, we realize that that's not probably realistic. But can you start to get more meat in your diet? Can you start to explore maybe some of the things that you mentioned to get more nutrient-dense foods? Can people make some room for some dairy and for some fermented foods? Yeah, absolutely you can. You absolutely can. It's not hard to do. Anyone can kind of implement some of these things. And I think that's a great way to go about it is addition by subtraction. You keep adding, convince people that they need to go on a walk or have some form of exercise, convince people they need to drink more water, convince people that they need more sleep, they need to recover from their day, they need to recover from their workouts. And I think it's a good place to start.
Definitely. And if these types of foods are supported, if people start, and even in the past years, these big companies, whether it's McDonald's or processed food companies, when they see people want healthy foods, they switch their marketing. They try to meet the demand. So if people want to be healthy and people want healthy foods and they're complaining that, it's too expensive to do, well, that's a whole different story. Once we start becoming healthier, start supporting these higher quality foods, that's when there becomes a drastic shift and it becomes accepted as opposed to the opposite of the norm.
Yeah, should be seeing some fast food, rotten meat places opening up around the country pretty quickly here, I think.
It's funny that McDonald's cheeseburger, although I some places McDonald's does sell, essentially rotten milk on the cheese. I mean, I think the actual cheese on McDonald's patties is actually completely fake. It's not legit. But I think that's a funny thing. Like people say, that you brought up the rotten meat at McDonald's. Well, technically speaking, if that was an aged burger and cheese, it's really
might be.
It's really about convention and perception too. It's really interesting.
Thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
No,
where can people find you?
Yeah, sure. I'm Frank Tufano on YouTube. You guys can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, website frank-tufano.com as well.
Appreciate it. Thanks again.
Thank you guys. Okay.
Take care. Very interesting, huh? Eating all that raw food, huh?
Yeah.
Pretty cool. I think some things he said, are easy to adopt. Other than like diving in on some raw food. I think it's all stuff we've talked about on this podcast before. Having some variety of meats. We've talked before on the podcast about bone broth, bone marrow, liver, heart, brain. Can you eat some of those things? Can you eat liver and heart? And maybe not. Like maybe just don't dig it, right? So don't make your life any harder than it really needs to be.
Yeah.
But if you try something and you like it, then maybe you found something that you can implement into your life.
I think the biggest deal is just getting over how unconventional it sounds in your head.
Right.
Like when we talked about fasting before, like you mentioned, we thought it was the stupidest thing ever. We do it. Oh, it's pretty great. So just like, again, like just getting over, raw meat. that sounds bad. Like as a kid, you just hear, don't eat raw meat, right?
Right.
So you just got to get over that and maybe do some research, see what you can eat, and maybe give it a shot, see how you feel. Probably, a lot of it's probably not that bad.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like, other than a restaurant where they've had some thinly cut beef, I don't think I've really tried a lot of like raw meat in that sense, other than, like we said, sushi, poke. And that's been about it. I haven't really, at home, I haven't just randomly grabbed a piece. I eat my food pretty like rare, but raw is
it's a different ballgame.
Is a little different. And what he said made some sense too. It was like, if you choose to cook it, maybe you just need to eat a little more of it, get the same amount of nutrients, because when you cook it, you're going to cook out some of the nutrients. So it's like, okay, that sounds, I mean, a lot of what he said, even though there were some things in there that are crazy, and he at least acknowledged that like most people aren't going to be able to follow and do exactly what he's doing.
Yeah, I like what he said about, eating basically twice as much, because I know when I make a steak rare, it tastes so much better.
Yeah.
But it kills my stomach. Again, back to my ridiculous stomach. But when I cook it really well, it's easier to handle. But I'm also like, damn it, I cooked it a little bit too long. But then I don't wake up in the middle of the night with my stomach cramping the way I did the other night with tri-tip. It was so bad. But
what if you eat less of it and it's cooked a little less?
I could give that a go.
Yeah, maybe try that.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's the fat content too, because I know I got some friends that I've put on diets before, and like when I put them on a keto diet, their stomach they're just dying. And I think it might have to do with just maybe the overall amount. So maybe just try to eat like 6 ounces and just see what that does.
Yeah, maybe I can't like keep up with the demand of trying to break all that down in my stomach or something.
Could be. Some people, there's so many other things that factor into this, but some people's gallbladder doesn't like keep up with trying to digest that amount of fat. And so therefore it could be, making you sick, or it could be other influences as well, but maybe just trying to eat a little bit less might work.
Yeah.
Might do you some good.
Yeah, but then I'm going to want to reach for carbs.
Oh yeah, I know.
Carbs like other carbs.
I know. Carbs beget carbs.
Well, that's what I noticed when I've been fasting. I'm still doing it every day. I'm still loving it. But if I have something, I don't know, like I'll have potatoes or I'll have extra rice just because I'm like, oh, this tastes really good right now. The next day is really hard to get through, like that initial wave of hunger. So I don't know if that's just me or if that's just the way it is, but it's been tough.
I think a lot of problems get solved, when you keep your stomach empty. I think that'll continue to help you a lot. So I think fasting can be great from that sense. And I think, what Frank was talking about with just eating less and just, the conventional standard American diet versus some of the other types of diets people might go on, the main factor, whether you're going vegan or carnivore, which seem like total opposites, maybe in both cases you just are making healthier decisions, and maybe in both cases, because you're on a quote unquote diet, you're also choosing to eat less. And maybe the simple act of just eating less can help make us healthier. And then also, when we had Mark Sisson on the podcast, we've had other people on the podcast who've talked about ketogenic diets, and they talk about your body's ability to switch over from being a sugar burning machine to a fat burning machine. I think that some of these things are misleading. And I think that in the absence of excess calories, I think the body works itself out and uses what's there as fuel. I think your body's like, hey, we got a little bit of sugar over here and you're getting kind of tired. Let's funnel that out to whoever needs it.
Yeah.
And I just think the body, like, although it is, it can be very confusing on how all this stuff works. I think it's simply a lot of times does come down to, if you're continually eating massive amounts of food, I think you're kind of wreaking havoc on your system and causing a lot of problems.
Yeah. And then my biggest concern, and how we talked about it a couple episodes ago, about like fasting doesn't make any sense to me. Like I need to be eating way more. Like you guys are dumb, blah, blah, blah. I haven't lost any weight at all. And I've really only been eating 1 to 2 times a day. And yesterday or Tuesday, doing deadlifts, those trap bar deadlifts, but Mark was like, yeah, let's go for a heavy set of 6, just see what you can get. Like you're probably still feeling strong from the meat and everything. So let's just go for it. I ended up pulling 306 times. previous to that, I did 300 once for a like all-time PR. So I don't know what that was all about, but I'm not losing strength and I'm not losing weight, which was my biggest concern of all of this. So whatever the hell is happening, it seems to be working.
Yeah. Well, I think fasting just your body releases some hormones that help protect lean muscle mass. Your body will release some hormones that will just help protect you in general. So I think it's, how long were you fasting that day? Were you fasting pretty long on that particular day?
I don't know exactly. I just know, so I'll for sure skip breakfast, and then I don't eat before 1 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a good chance that was an 18-hour fast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of falls in line with most of the research that shows, that you aren't going to really lose muscle mass. Now, could you optimize your diet better towards gaining more muscle mass and towards by eating, more frequently? Sure. I'm sure you can. Right. But, from what I've seen, and Nsima's been doing this for a little bit longer as well. And I think, a lot of people are reporting kind of similar effects with fasting.
Yeah, it's great.
I think, it just takes a lot of trying it out because like I mentioned shortly, it wasn't keto because I was still eating carbs, but I was eating less than about 70 grams of carbs a day and still doing the same level of activity just to see, because like in the back of my head, I was like, I'm going to feel tired. I won't have much energy. I felt fine.
Mm-hmm.
Like I didn't feel like I had any less energy at all. I actually felt maybe a little bit better. So it's kind of odd because like when you look at a lot of like, let's say high intensity athletes, maybe athletes that do basketball, soccer, jujitsu, I would have expected to feel like no energy on the mats because that's what I hear from a lot of people that, cut out their carbs or eat way less carbs, but I didn't feel any of that. So I think there's probably a large mental aspect to it. They're like, oh, I'm not eating carbs, feeling tired. I think that a lot of that might not actually be true. It just might be literally mental.
Yeah. And you're pretty smart with all this stuff too, because you've been doing it for a long time. So I'm sure that maybe when you looked at it, you're like, I'm going to cut back on some carbs, but
I ate way more fat.
I'm going to have more meat. I'm going to eat more fat. Right. And I think that was Frank's point, was like a lot of times if you're going to eat carbs, maybe you're not getting the nutrients that you need. Maybe you eat a couple French fries, or maybe you eat, which you'd get like a little bit of like vitamin C and a little bit of vitamin A and maybe some potassium and some sodium from that. But you're not going to get a whole lot more than that. But if you just simply ate more meat, you would get more nutrients. You'd probably get a good amount of calories because you'd get more fat and you'd get more protein. So when you start to kind of break it down that way, something like rice just is almost just carbohydrates. It doesn't really have a whole lot else in it. It doesn't mean that you can't eat rice and doesn't mean that you shouldn't ever eat rice. It just means that maybe what we're looking at most of the time is not always the right thing. We're always looking at the macro, and maybe we should be looking at the macro and the micro and piecing those together, because maybe when we piece those together, maybe we have something that would work more efficiently and work faster for us. So anyway, I thought that was some good stuff.
It was.
Yeah. I like that he wasn't, he did say some crazy things, and he does some even crazier things. Unconventional. There you go. Thank you. You're good with the with the words. But he wasn't. He said that he doesn't totally write off vegetables, and he wasn't so like it wasn't like a religious thing for him.
Yeah.
He's just like, this is what's working, and this is why it works. He kind of had a little bit of facts to back everything up. He wasn't full bore. Everyone should be eating meat.
Yeah.
No. Well, and you can also you can utilize this knowledge for whatever you need, So like vegetables, somebody might say vegetables are kind of worthless. And like he pointed out, vegetables can sometimes have anti-nutrients. And they certainly don't have a lot of calories, right? But okay, now let's talk about, you're doing a bodybuilding show, or you're doing a physique show and you want to lose or let's just say you want to lose a bunch of weight. And let's say you weigh 300 pounds, you want to lose weight. Well, shit, a 300-pound person has probably over a long period of time consumed a lot of food, a large volume of food. So now let's say, okay, I want you to, with every meal, I want you to have, 2 big servings of vegetables, because you want that person to feel satiated and you want them to get used to their food, and you want over a period of time to bring down their caloric intake. And that's where you can utilize vegetables to your advantage. And furthermore, if you just like them, just eat them.
Yeah.
You don't need to make your life that hard. I mean, if something is messing up your sleep, if something is messing up your stomach, if you're not feeling right, then yeah, you need to like reevaluate that. But in general, if you're feeling pretty good and you like the foods that are in your diet, you're pretty happy with the results you're getting, then I don't think there's a lot of reasons to really overly worry about it. The fight's not against vegetables. The fight's not against fruit. The fight is against trying to pull the reins in a little bit on these processed foods, because those are the things we're going to tend to overeat, and more than likely those are going to be the things that give us the body that we don't want.
Yeah, it's really just taking a little bit from everything and just keeping it simple. I don't eat a lot of sugar or a crazy amount of it. If you want to have a little bit here and there, and a lot of processed packaged foods. I mean, I've been staying away from that for a long time now, and I just feel overall better. And just add in what feels good. You don't have to totally cut out carbs if you feel better with carbs, but don't eat like 800 grams a day liquid carbs. It's just it can be very simple, but you can make it difficult if you do a lot of unnecessary things.
And when you used to eat more carbs, and even when you design diets for people, what happens when the carbohydrate intake is really high? I would imagine that the fat content has to come down, right?
The fat there's a guy right now. His name's John Schaefer. I think you've seen him before. He's the really white black guy on Instagram, right? He's eating like maybe 400. He's white and black. That's why. But he looks white, but he's half black. That's why he's the really white black guy. Anyway.
That should be his Instagram name.
It is his Instagram
name. It is his Instagram name.
It is. John, I think right now is eating like 90 or maybe 100 grams of fat a day, but he's eating like an excess of 490, 500 grams of carbs.
Yeah.
He does jujitsu also. He's done shows. He's jacked.
Yep.
And this is like the leanest he's ever been, but the most food he's ever been eating.
And that's even a pretty reasonable amount of fat. Like a lot of times you hear even some of these high level bodybuilders that are big, that are, this guy probably weighs what, 200 pounds?
210, actually probably at 210 to 212.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is during his, like right now he's doing jujitsu and lifting. But when we were getting ready for his bodybuilding show, I think like a year and a half ago, he was eating, I think like maybe his carbs are at 200 and his fats were down to like 50 to 60 to get that lean, and he's doing a lot of low intensity cardio. Now, obviously, he's just doing much more work, and to actually fuel that work, he has to eat a lot of food, but he's almost, he's close to being show ready.
I've met him before at Barbell Brigade.
You've met him, yeah. So, I mean, if he were to prep right now, like, he'd be there in 6 weeks.
Right.
But, like, he's eating an insane amount of food. So it really just depends on the person and like how much activity they have to fuel their workouts. That's what I'm like.
It's also a good idea. It's a good idea to get yourself used to eating more food. It's a good idea to get yourself used to eating less food.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, if you were going to go back to bodybuilding, you might want to think about like, for lack of a better term, you might want to think, I'm going to race up my metabolism and I'm going to start to eat more often, more frequently. And maybe you're going to start to do 2-a-day workouts where you got a little bit of cardio in there, a little bit of pump sessions going on here and there, right? And so you might just switch stuff up just to throw your body, like just to throw a monkey wrench into it and kind of just see, how you react to it. But, a lot of people that are trying to adhere to a diet, they just try to always eat less and always eat less and always eat less. And then they start maybe with something like fasting, and then they're trying to fast more and more and more and more all the time. And it's like, well, now you might get to a point where you're going to start to rebound back from it. So you need to kind of like an exit strategy out of these things. Like what are the next couple steps going to look like? And what I shared with a group that I've been helping earlier today, I just said, you need to have time for everything. You understand that, there's going to be periods of time where you eat less and you'll continue to weigh less. And there's going to be a point where your weight just stops. You're 185 pounds and you're stuck there, and you want to be 165 or whatever. You're just going to be stuck. You'll be stuck there for a little while. It's okay to be stuck. And when you're stuck, that's a good time, not to give up, but it's a good time to switch gears. It's a good time to say, okay, I fasted. I made some progress. I lost 15 pounds. That was great. And I got rid of carbohydrates. I'm going to bring fruit back in. I'm going to bring a cheat meal back in once a week. I'm going to bring, right? Like just, because you're playing the long game. There's no reason for you to weigh 165 tomorrow. And even if we could figure that out, you're going to rebound back hard and you won't be in the shape that you want to be in anyway. So because we know that we're playing a long game, it might take us a year to get there. But that's fine. The longer that it takes us to get there, the longer you're going to be able to stay there and the easier it's going to be. Anyway, that's all the time we got for today. Strength is never weakness. Weakness never strength. Catch you guys later.